Good evening, everyone. My name is Emily Butler. I am the Associate Vice President of Strategic Partnerships and Initiatives for the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation. And on behalf of the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation and Monona Terrace, I have the wonderful pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague, Eric Vogel, who is your speaker tonight. Now, I know Eric very well. He has spent approximately 2 years in the Arizona desert as our scholar in residence, and he got to know us quite well during that time. Eric Vogel is a designer, educator, architectural historian, and curator based in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He is former chair of the 3D design department at the Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design. He holds a degree in art history from Harvard University, a master's in architecture from the Southern California Institute of Architecture, and is currently pursuing a mid-career PhD at the School of Architecture and Urban Planning at UW-Milwaukee. As board president of the Wisconsin chapter of Docomomo US, Eric is currently leading a research and film project about Milwaukee's 20th century architectural history titled Milwaukee Moderns. Concurrently, he is working with the Museum of Wisconsin Art on two new architecture and design related exhibitions: The Evolution of Frank Lloyd Wright's Early Modern Chair Design and Architectural Photography of Mid-Century Wisconsin photographer Richard H. Bills. Everyone, please join me in welcoming Eric Vogel.
Thank you, Emily, for those kind words, and welcome everyone. My biography is not important, but I wanted to point out that both Thomas Lewinsky, my co-curator, and I have a background in architecture as well as art history, and I think this is an interesting jumping off point for us. It influences the way we work, it influences the way that we talk with one another, and it influences the methodologies that we use when we come to curating an exhibit. So what is a curator? Well, we're the second half. It's a person in charge of a department or museum where objects, be it from art or science, from the past, are collected, or a person who organizes and arranges showing of art or other objects of interest. I'm the latter. So I'm a guest curator, and I'm very honored to work as part of the curatorial team at the Museum of Wisconsin Art. Special thanks go out to Lori Winters, who is at the far right, and my co-curator, Thomas Lewinsky. To my left is Jen Gray, the director of the Taliesin Institute. All of these people were instrumental. Jen Gray allowed me to stay at Taliesin West for a year and allowed me to jump into their archives and see the objects in situ. It was a profound experience. Claire Rolfs, the board chair at MOA, and Joe Spector, the new CEO of the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation, and Emily Butler in all her color on the far left. So I wanted to give you a quick preview. Really, my talk tonight is not going to be about the exhibit itself. It's going to be a behind-the-scenes look at what goes into producing an exhibit specifically about furniture, architecture and design in context, but specifically about chairs and tables. So the exhibit is based on 5 stages of development at Taliesin East and Taliesin West. So many of you who've been to Taliesin know that there were 2 great fires, one including murders and scandal, the second including a major renovation of the building to include a second floor and a large loggia. Each of these stages produced new pieces of furniture. Then, of course, the Great Fellowship that happened in the 30s, the move to Taliesin West during the winters in the late 30s, 40s, and 50s. And we included an epilogue, or a coda, which we call the roundhouse and radial furniture. And it describes the 1950s and really the duration of the Guggenheim project and the small houses that were done during that time. We begin with Taliesin 1, which you see here. Taliesin 1 is presented in the context of 4 prairie period pieces of furniture that you see, to give context to what we call the frame and plane, which was a style really that developed in Taliesin 1, 2, and culminated at Taliesin 3. Highly rectilinear. This is a great armchair from Taliesin 2. What we're tracing is how Wright developed pieces of furniture for himself at Taliesin and then moved those ideas to his clients. So we discovered this pattern And you can see it here on the slide on the left. So the armchair was developed for Wright's own dining table. You can see it there in the historic photograph. He, at the same time, is developing this very light oak, rectilinear, no trim banding, a completely different aesthetic from just 2 years before at the end of the Prairie period. The chairs on the wall are dressing room chairs for the Little House in Wayzata, Minnesota from 1913. So then we explore Taliesin 3 and 4 specific chairs related to the framing plane style from 15 years of duration. You see different materials used from raw-cut lumber. You see the angled kick on the chair closest to us in plywood. It's a solid core plywood with thick veneer. It's the earliest form of plywood. The Emil Bachhaus chair with cane to the right. All of these are the first half of the exhibit, which really focus on Wright using rectilinear forms based on the square and the rectangle. And at this point, there's a pivot. You can see the Willie House furniture at the left and the Taliesin Fellowship in the 30s on the right. This is a significant change in his furniture aesthetic, and really one that has remained unexplored until this exhibit. You see at the very center of the slide 2 chairs from the Usonian period, one from the Smith House with the red cushion, and one at the right from the Affleck House. And many people have seen Usonian furniture before. No one really knew where it came from. In fact, there are very few books written with any commentary about the Usonian furniture. There are plenty of books about his Usonian houses. What's so hard to understand is why there's no commentary about the furniture, which was such an integral part of the Usonian formula. We think we found the Lucy skeleton. We found the missing link, and it resulted in our fabricating chairs that had been lost, that we only knew through photographs and drawings. Here is one for the 80 German warehouse, which Wright went back to renovate in the 1930s, in 1935. He had done it in 1916, 17 as a warehouse, and in the 30s they were looking to find a new use for the building, and they thought a restaurant, bar, and dance hall on the roof would be a great idea. And so Wright designed this dance hall chair in 1935. It goes into Taliesin West. So this is what we call his folded plane period. So as opposed to the Freeman plane of the earlier years, here he's taking planes and his famous Taliesin West armchair, which you see in the blue. We have 2 versions of that, now called the origami chair, because it was so reminiscent of folded Japanese paper. And that name has stuck. It's now the official name of the chair. Here's the coda. We were excited to discover, I'll tell this story a little bit later, a chair and table for the Guggenheim Cafe in New York City that had never been manufactured, and there they are on the left. So we trace 6 decades of furniture production in Wright's career, and people ask, well, where did this idea come from? Like many great ideas, it came from travel. In this case, some people talk about getting inspiration in their sleep and their dreams. For me, it is almost always when I'm away from my work and away from my home and I'm exploring something new. This happens to be a trip to the Netherlands in 2018. This is the Gemeente Museum, now called the Kunstmuseum Der Haag in The Hague in Netherlands. And I was fascinated by a permanent exhibit that they had on display of Gerrit Rietveld's, who they called the Free Radical. And in the description, I'm reading, you see at the upper right, I read, "For Rietveld is bold and a visionary. The slat chair is a radical design. The back, the seat, the armrest, legs, crossbeams are all independent elements. You can see them as separate lines and planes and can picture them stretching out further in space. The chair is Rietveld's statement. Space becomes truly tangible as a 3-dimensional construction." I thought, I love it. I remember that chair. I used to see that chair. My dad had a reproduction of that chair in his office. I loved it. I thought, but it reminds me of something else. And of course, this is Wright's slantback chair from 1900, maybe 1900 to 1902. Some people consider that chair to be the first modern chair in America, and Rietveld's chair at the left. The easy chair from the Little House, which is in the exhibit, and the slantback chair at the left. You're probably more familiar with the chair and its colors: black, red, blue, yellow, white. The painting didn't happen until 1923. So from 1918-19 to 1923, the first 4 or 5 years, it was a dark shade of brown. So in the exhibit, they actually traced a relationship between designers in Holland that had been influenced by Wright directly. So you can see a chair by Jan Wils in the black fabric, the right, in comparison to Rietveld's children's furniture, which is this square slat base construction, and how different they are. But it was always with this notion that this was born out of Rietveld's head for the first time. It was completely original. There was no source for Rietveld's genius. And then I saw this chair, and I looked at the label carefully, and it says Robert Ventehoff, chair for De Stijl houseboat. And Ventehoff was a founding member of the De Stijl group, of which Rietveld became a member. Piet Mondrian was a member, so you may be familiar with the production, the paintings, and the design of this group. Notice that the chair was made by Rietveld. So I thought, I've got to check. I've got to check. I don't know who Robert Ventehoff is. I need to figure this out and understand the origins of this. And I read the Dutch architect Robert Ventehoff traveled in the United States shortly before World War I and became acquainted with Wright's work. Upon his return to Holland, he built, during the war, 2 very Wrightian houses, Hesterheide, near Utrecht. I had no idea. And then this book came out just about 10 years ago. And it explores Robert Ventehoff as an architect and founding member, especially his early years. So here is the house that they described, the Wrightian villa. It's poured concrete. And I don't know if you can see because of the slightly obscured, but it says when Wright went to Taliesin, and supposedly, my correspondence with Herman, he looked in the archives and claims that it shows clearly that Ventehoff spent 2 weeks living with Wright at Taliesin in Spring Green. That's remarkable. Very few guests stayed that long. But I was also told that they were working on a potential collaborative project in New York, that Ventehoff was very interested in working with Wright. So if he did spend 2 weeks at Taliesin, the question is, how much did he see and what did he see? According to the research in this book, it says that Ventehoff became intrigued by his designs for standardized housing. Wright was working for the Richards Company designing prototypes for mass-produced homes. And of course, we know where those are. Mike Lillick has stood at this very lectern talking about the American system-built homes and the Model B1. And so this was on the drawing boards at Taliesin at that time, no question about it. And so when you see the relationship between what Ventehoff is designing and building himself and what's happening on the drawing boards at Taliesin, now you start to see a relationship, a dialogue that's starting to happen between Wright and the Dutch that lasts for another 2 decades. So I became curious. I thought, well, what's inside the house? What's the furniture inside the Model B1? That should lead to some connection between the Dutch and Wright when it comes to decorative arts. But the drawings that I could see, including the Habs drawing at Wright, don't have any furniture. And the house itself didn't have any furniture, mostly because people like me were taking groups of students and filling the house. So this is a funny shot from 2009. So I thought, it's time to go to Madison and see what the drawings of the American system-built homes show themselves. And so the research component of the exhibition started quite early, and I was fascinated to see that none of the drawings included furniture either, except when it came to the renderings. So there were construction documents, and then there were sales documents. Now, the sales renderings did show furniture. In fact, in every drawing, they showed furniture. But when you look at it, remember, these are 1914, 15, 16. This is after his Prairie period. But look at the furniture. It looks exactly like early Prairie period. If you know the furniture from the Dana House or from the Martin House, it's much more evocative of early Prairie, 10 years before. And of course, the young men who were coming to work for Wright at Taliesin, Emile Brodel, Antonio Raymond, Rudolf Schindler, starting to get something from those names. These are Europeans obsessed with Wright because they had seen the Wadsmith portfolio, or they'd seen the softcover book called Frank Lloyd Wright, Chicago. They knew his prairie work, and they were likely given the task of filling these rooms with furniture. So here's the cover of Frank Lloyd Wright, Chicago. Every young architect who was interested in American architecture had this book, including Robert Ventehoff, and a shot of the Dana House at the right. So I said, well, if we're going to dig into this mystery, then the place to go is Avery Library at Columbia University in New York, where the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation archives are domiciled. So here is the archive in the basement of Avery, and it was a phenomenal experience to be able to handle. They actually coat the drawings in a plastic so that you can handle them, so that they're not worried about the fragility of the paper. Here are drawings. Imagine over 1,000 drawings for the American system-built homes. It's the most drawings of any project in Wright's career. And we have 6 buildings in Milwaukee to represent that, the 4 duplexes and the 2 bungalows. But very much the same as when I said, well, and of course, Jennifer Gray, the now Taliesin Institute director, was in fact in charge of the archive at that point. So I'm asking Jennifer, are there any other projects that I could look at in the same time period, 1912 to 1914, that might have more specific furniture development? She said, well, I think the Little residence, you should look into that. And of course, that's the drawing on the right. And for the first time, I saw Wright conceptualizing furniture. It's not just the architecture. These are his hand sketches. And I thought, well, they actually do look prairie. They look like that armchair looks like the armchair from the Bradley house. Maybe I'm wrong about this instinct that there should be something more modern for the American system-built homes. And then I saw the drawing at the right, marked Little. And this is from a later, Henry Russell Hitchcock and Wright are going through all of his drawings in the 1930s to try to correct the chronology for a major retrospective at the Museum of Modern Art. And so Wright is putting down the dates that he remembers and the title of the client name. So we know it's the Little house. Wright actually dates it 1906, which is 7 years too early. We know that these are drawings from 1913, but look at what's happening here. So the drawing at the left is a more streamlined version of his Prairie Library table, but look at the sketch at the right. That's something completely different. And look in the sketch how he had the table at the right. You can see the corner has been erased, and he's exploring the exact qualities that they were talking about Gerrit Rietveld in that opening exhibition. This idea of extension into space, of space as a compositional component of the furniture design. Extension rather than mass, dynamism. So I said, are there any examples of the Little house furniture? And she said, well, just go to the Met. I said, okay, I'll go to the Met. She said, yeah, they have the entire living room of the Little house reconstructed as part of the period rooms, which you see here. And that's when I saw the table in the corner in the sunlight. And it blew me away. So they had a small panel with information about the table, which describes its being part of a suite of furniture done specifically for the Littles, but in fact that only 2 sconces, 2 standing lamps, and this table were actually designed and built for the room, that the Littles chose most of the furniture to come from their first house with Wright, from Peoria in 1903. So these 5 pieces of furniture are the earliest, probably coming from Taliesin itself. And they don't look anything like the furniture in the rest of the room. So here now is clear evidence. The prairie style at the left with its tapered feet and the trim banding. And you can also see, although the oak is not fumed, it does have a patina. It's darkened with time, whereas this white oak did not have any surface treatment. The only ornamentation is the small reveal, the edge of the tabletop. Look at the joint. Whoops. If you look at the joint, they pass through one another. There's no emphasis on the joint coming to termination. So in much of this, I have photography to thank. So as I worked through the archives, many different stages and decades of photographs helped inform our understanding of the furniture. Yes, the drawings were incredibly important, but the photographs of Taliesin I were the evidence that Wright was doing things for himself that were entirely different from his commissions. Here we see a really important chair. Come to the exhibit. We'll talk a little bit about the cantilever of this chair. So this is Wright has completely deconstructed the typical chair structure. There are no back stiles. So typically the tall back posts of the chair would carry the weight of the backrest in the seat. Here it's just the 4 feet. The back of the chair cantilevers almost 4 feet into space. So this is the first time we'd seen this chair. And so we spent quite a bit of time figuring out the proportions and trying to understand the basic geometry of the chair. Of course, we saw photographs of the fire where the chair was lost. And then we saw photographs of the Taliesin II armchair, which replaced it. And look at the difference. So Wright is still in the prayer. He's still looking at the vertical backrest. Interesting how he uses a small style, like a miniature ornamental style to either side of the backrest to tie in the slats of the Japanese print stand in the corner of the room so that the chair and the print stand evoke the same feeling. You know, we talk a little bit about how the artistry of the Japanese print in the stand is comparable to the grain pattern, the sort of wabi-sabi grain pattern on the back of the chair. But look at how distinctly different that is from the wide backrest of the Taliesin II chair. This is the only known photograph of this chair after the fire. And what's amazing is that he built prototypes of the chair in 1915, 14, 15. All of this was supposedly done after the fire. So the chair is designed as a response to the first set being destroyed. But look at the patina of the chairs on the right. So this photograph, these are all taken at the same time. This is early 1915. We know because Wright published these in October of 1915 in Architectural Forum. Look at the condition of the wood. Look how patinaed it is. Those chairs were not built recently. So then the question was, well, when were they designed and built? Was it before the fire? Here's a reconstruction floor plan. This is not a finished document. This is Wright's design document. You can see he's still working on the reflected ceiling plan, but he's already got a set of furniture in the piano. He knows where the furniture is in the new room. And look at the right. Typically, in these drawings, Frank Lloyd Wright is using just a simple square or a rectangle for furniture. There's no demarcation of a specific design, except here. And there's the chair. So then that begs the question, is he designing this interior architecture and aligning the chair with it? Or does he already have a chair design and now he's aligning the architecture to the chair? The chair is the generator of the design. What's even more interesting is now that you see these pieces together from 1912 to 1914, now we start to understand that chair by Robert Venthof from built by Gerrit Rietveld. But there are distinct differences. The Robert Venthof chair is much lighter. The square stock is much more delicate. It's still square in section, but there's much more volume to the chair. And I thought, well, maybe I need to go and see what other commissions were being done for other clients in 1914, 1915. And so literally the next file is the S. Mori Japanese print shop on Michigan Avenue in Chicago. And there's this drawing. So I looked at the chair and I thought, that's unusual. Again, not just a square. There's actually a description of a chair at the table. That's unusual. And then I found the drawing and a photograph in Tom Hines's great book, Frank Lloyd Wright, Interiors and Furniture. Now that looked like the Robert Venthof chair. Again, we don't know exactly what's on the drawing boards when Venthof is at Taliesin in 1914, but it's remarkable, the dialogue that's happening between these objects. What you notice is that there's a difference between the things that were built. It's subtle, but you notice the extension of the arms away beyond the vertical style You can see that's not in the drawing. And the way that the foot at the bottom left tapers at the end, that's also not the way it is in the built object. So then as a curator, you start to think, well, wait a minute. Now I need to go and see the object itself. And that's where the field work comes in. So Thomas and I went to the home and studio in Oak Park where the chair is domiciled. And Celeste Adams, the director, gave us full access. We turned it upside down. We looked at the way that the seat connected. We measured all of the angles. We made computer drawings and we made a model. And I find that this is the best thing that I learned from architecture school because once you make the model, you take it with you wherever you go. It sits on your desk. You're looking at it in different dimensions. You see things about furniture when you're looking at a model that you don't when you have an hour in a museum to draw it. And of course, we went to the Emil Bach house, which the Pritzker family had purchased and fully renovated. It was actually an Airbnb for a while. My wife gave it to me as a birthday. We got to stay for the weekend. And so I saw and sat in this chair. And I thought, 1915? No one talks about this chair. How could no one talk about this chair? It looks like de style. It's the most unique thing that I've seen of his furniture. And Kane, I know that Marcel Breuer and some of the Bauhaus furniture designers use cane, but I never knew that Wright used cane. So this was all a revelation. And then again, to deconstruct the chair, not to have corner posts, but to have voids at the corners. I thought, this is remarkable. And I could find a drawing at the archives, but then I was told, no, the furniture was never made. That the Pritzkers built the furniture, but there's no evidence that the furniture was ever made. In fact, the Bachs were much more traditional people, and they likely had more Victorian style, historic furniture in the house. And in fact, here's a photograph at the left of the house from the 1960s, and there's no evidence of any furniture. So I was discouraged because I thought, what a remarkable circumstance to have the original furniture in that house. And then at Taliesin West, looking through correspondence, I found this, a letter from Mrs. Emil Bach after she had moved to California and her husband had just died. And so she's writing to Wright to say, you know, my husband is gone, and I was reflecting on the years that you worked with us, that we were together at the house in Chicago. And she says, I recall with a thrill of joy the simple beauty of the design of the furniture you built. The unusual lighting, the conveniences incorporated, saving space, and above all, the feel of the black walnut wood used throughout the place. Yes, indeed, it was not only a livable house, but also a lovable home, thanks to you. So we know that they built the furniture. And so I went to Taliesin, and I thought, maybe what I need to do is look more specifically at the difference between reproduction furniture and original furniture. So even if it wasn't related exactly to the type of tables and chairs that we were finding and we were interested in, here's Kyle Dockery at Taliesin, who couldn't have been more helpful. Kyle is an incredible resource for that institution. And we have a fourth quarterly newsletter that the foundation sends out, and Kyle's written a brilliant essay. So please be sure to look for that. Here he's showing me the original bench from Taliesin 1. It was the only one to survive the fire, and it has been reconstructed, so it may have been damaged during the fire. But you can see the difference in the patina, again, on the bench at the far and the table, which was reproduced later. And so I became really interested in this Taliesin 1 aesthetic and in measuring things on site to see the relationships between things, the moldings, part of the wall, and the dimension of the furniture, and how often the tables and chairs seem to be related to masonry or other architectural objects. And of course, drawing on site, trying to understand the section, the elevations, and the axonometrics of this furniture. And the drawing and the model making became really important ingredients. Here's what you would typically find in a book of the period. When you go to buy, it's very rare to find Frank Lloyd Wright furniture in its original context. So this is the Ingalls house from 1909, and this is the interior of the Ingalls house from a sales photo. This is very common. But this is the furniture. And in this case, for the Ingalls house, we don't think that it was ever fabricated. And you see the chair at the bottom right. So this is significant because it's 1909, and it's very evocative of that Taliesin 2 wide horizontal backrest. But this is before he goes to Europe to create the Wasmuth portfolio. This is 1909. So this is very early, the tail end of the Prairie period. And so not having any photographs, not having any extant pieces of furniture, we begin to slowly look at the proportions and the potential dimensions. So we don't know whether our dimensions are exact. We can only work from guesstimates based on the extant furniture that we have and by making models. So please don't tell my mother that I showed you my studio. It's never this messy. I promise you. This is just that day. So we build the models to study. And then we study the models and we make shop drawings. And those shop drawings, this is a great shop drawing by Steve Richings, who has worked with our fabricator, Stafford Norris, who you see at the far right. Stafford made the Taliesin 1 chair, the Taliesin 2 chair, and the Ingalls chair for the exhibition, and they are just masterpieces. So Steve and Stafford have worked together. Steve does all the drawings, Stafford does all the woodworking. So this is where we go from a small scale model to a one-to-one prototype at Stafford's wood shop. It's still a model. But the reason we do that is to be as exact as we can. The marginal drawing here, you can see the axonometric sketch, is part of the Ingalls drawing, and it's really what caught our attention, because I felt like I'd seen that drawing somewhere before. And of course, here we are at the Museum of Wisconsin Art, for those of you who haven't been there. And 10 years ago, I wandered into their gallery, and there were chairs from Taliesin in Spring Green. I thought, fantastic. This is the chair I saw in the drawing. It's not quite, it's actually one of the prototypes. It's not the wide back version, but I can actually draw this and measure it myself. So I asked Lori if she would give me a couple of hours in the galleries with my tape measure, which she obliged. And so we really drilled down into the exact dimensions of these pieces in such detail, which really was the foundation for our being able to fabricate these. So here, for example, is the Taliesin 2 chair, and this is my sort of fake animation. But we ended up building a dozen models and living with these over time and starting to feel their weight, because they have the same dimension. They're all to scale. So you can tell when one is really light and when one is really heavy and massive. You can hold them in your hand, and you can look underneath. You can look from the back. You can look at angles that is very difficult to observe a piece of furniture at its full scale. And this is when I was given the opportunity of a residency at Taliesin West. So this is the desert house where I lived and worked, my office. And I took everything with me. I took all of the books, I took all of my drawings and the models. And by that time, I'd made notes, I'd made hand drawings, and I was deeply into making computer studies, which allowed me to do comparisons between these different armchairs. So these are all armchairs that are in the exhibit, and to really study the development over a chronology. So 1914, the Taliesin 2 chair that we saw in the historic photograph with the wide back, then the Emil Bach chair, then the Taliesin 3 armchair, and then the Willie House armchair at the far right. And of course, at that time, what was brilliant about being there recently is that Avery Library was starting to digitize all the drawings. So then I could access Avery's inventory online and look at originals at Taliesin West and see the furniture itself in the archives at Taliesin West. So here you see an early drawing. This is actually, we think, the first drawing of the origami chair, which at that time was actually called the Hannah House chair. So the origami chair actually comes from the fireplace at the Hannah House in Stanford in 1936, and it develops. You can see Wright is playing with ideas for folded flaps. This is 36, 37, the advent of plywood. And then we get to go behind the scenes in the archive and look at the object itself. So here we are, Thomas and I are with the registrar at Taliesin West, Pat Evans. And that's allowing us to begin to put a narrative together about how this period of furniture that Anthony Olafson called the lost years, that no one has talked about, these significant pieces at Taliesin 1, 2, and 3, how significant they were and how they might create a narrative about Wright's furniture that people haven't discussed. So we sit down. This is the temporary exhibition space at the Museum of Wisconsin Art. It's 30 by 60. It's 2 squares. It's 1,800 square feet. It's not very big. And so we're thinking, well, here's the story that we want to tell. Now, what furniture do we want? And here's our initial list. It was almost 200 pieces of furniture. Well, we knew that wasn't going to work. And so then we made a list that had 60. And the way that a curator starts is you go for your 60 best, and then you see what you can get. And you can see in the left, we've marked out, 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 out. We couldn't get them. We figured there was no way. And I'll tell you, perseverance helps a lot. Actually, the bottom three we did end up getting and are in the exhibit. But then you determine, based on what you can get, the exact layout. You start to think about volume, about space, about wall, and we put together a layout and plan that we thought would describe this narrative. And we were pretty proud of ourselves. We're like, we've got something here that we can take back to Lori, pitch to her, and see if we can get an exhibit in the works. And then Pat Evans said, well, I mean, all of this furniture has already been documented by Filippo Allison. I said, what? And I'm thinking, he scooped us. The word is already out. She said, well, it's in Italian. I don't know how many people in English will have know about this book, but yeah, he's done it all. It's all in there. Over 800 pieces, and they're all drawn. He inventoried everything. The Europeans love taxonomy. It's a straight back with arms. It's a straight back without arms. It's a straight back with half arms. It's a straight back that has curving arms. It's unbelievable. He tried to source, document, diagram, and date every freestanding piece of furniture in Wright's whole career. It's a phenomenal book. But fortunately, he didn't know about this drawing. This was in Tom Moynihan's collection, CEO of Domino's Pizza, who had the great Frank Lloyd Wright furniture collection. There's still a museum. He deaccessioned this drawing. He had it, I don't know how it got out of the Frank Lloyd Wright archives, but somehow, after Wright died, perhaps it was sold to Moynihan, trying to raise money for the foundation in those years after Wright's death. We don't know. It gets into Moynihan's collection. It disappears for decades. And then suddenly, in 2018, he's moving his philanthropy in a different direction, so he decides to make a partial gift to the Metropolitan. And all of a sudden, it's become public. And this chair is not known. These drawings have never been seen. And so these are in the exhibit for the first time, exhibited publicly. And here's the chair from the Little House that looks remarkably like the wide-back chair of Taliesin II. And so we studied the chair to try to think about making a model. And I'm talking with friends in Minneapolis, Steve Sikora, who owns the Willie House, and he says, you really should contact Jennifer Olivares. She, at the Minneapolis Institute of Art, she knows this period really well. She might have a lead for you on this, because I feel like the Lovenesses might have built something like this. And Steve knows everybody in Minneapolis and knows Wright's furniture from that period incredibly well. And so I mentioned this to the librarian at Taliesin West, and she says, there was a guy, Tucker, who was doing a book. He was going to do a book on Wright's furniture, but I don't think he ever finished, but I think it's in the archive. And so we go and we find the Tucker collection. And in the Tucker collection, here's a letter from Mr. Tucker to Mr. Tucker from Don and Virginia Loveness. So they built the Little's furniture. Somehow, through Taliesin, they got permission to build this furniture from 1913 for a house that Wright designed them in the late 1950s. And so original furniture is in these photographs from Virginia Loveness. And Don built the furniture himself, and she did all of the fabrics. And I said, well, where is this furniture? She said, well, you should call Ted and Debbie Muntz. They just renovated the houses, and I think the furniture might still be there. So I did, and I visited Ted, and he took me out to the cabin, and there was the furniture. But it was only half of it. There was a whole settee and chair set that I didn't see. And I asked him where it was. He said, well, I've got it in my barn. And there it was with the lawnmower and the powerboat. And so the suite of furniture, I said, I think this is really important. Would you consider pulling this out and looking at the condition? Could we conserve it and show it in the exhibition? And so we did. And it was covered in black mold. Not the two dressing room chairs. Those were in good condition, but you can see the comparison between the armchair and the dressing room chair. But Ted very kindly helped support the conservation of the chairs. We had them cleaned, and here they are in exhibit, both the dressing room chair and the armchair. Now, we didn't have luck finding many pieces. They're very few extant. And we thought, in order to tell this true story, we will need to fabricate. We'll need to show some chairs that have never been seen before. And this chair in particular. This chair, this is the 1915 photograph of the Taliesin II dining chair. It lasted. It was the only known image of Taliesin's interiors for 15 years, from 1914 to 1929. So imagine, this is right at his most famous. He's just published the Wasmuch Portfolio in 1911, 1912. All the Europeans are coming to work with him, to see his work, and this is the only thing they see of Taliesin. And look at the chair, look at the prominence of the piece of furniture. So I said, are there any other pieces, any other photographs that we can look at? And Tom Hines had one in his great book about the interiors and furniture of Wright. And there it is on the right. And so this gave us another angle. And so with the drawings that I had done and this new photograph, we could put together computer drawings. We could build new models comparing the wide back version and the narrow back version. Steve Riching could make a shop drawing, and then we could build one-to-one prototypes. And here we are. This is the man cave for architecture and design curators. This is, it's guys in flannel with wood in a shop. There's nothing better. And that's Stafford Norris. And those are the three, he made in soft pine, he made three full-scale mock-ups of the Taliesin I chair at the far left, the Ingalls chair in the middle, and then the Taliesin II, the wide-backed dining chair. And it's amazing what you learn. So what Wright was doing to create independent pieces that appeared to float, that were not his prairie style, they were not heavy, they were not massive, they were not carefully joined, no mortise and tenon. How did he achieve that effect? Through the making process, through these full-scale mock-ups, we found tiny details. So thanks to this photograph, you can see we're looking at the chair, we're looking at the photograph, thinking, it's just something's not the same, something's not right. And then Stafford notices the little shadow line here, notices these shadow lines. And he says, well, the back's not on the same plane. And of course, he was right. He had built it with the back flush with the style. But of course, it wasn't meant to be like that. And so we took 1/8 of an inch off of the stiles, and that allowed the piece, the backrest, to float. And it's an absolutely essential detail to how that chair conveys this idea of the independence of the parts. The other advantage of creating prototypes is that you can sit in them. And when everybody says, aren't Frank Lloyd Wright's chairs totally uncomfortable? I can raise my hand and say, actually, they're really comfortable. I've sat in them. And so the Taliesin dining chair is the one I'm sitting at the left, and Thomas is in the Ingalls chair. And they're different. They have different stances. You can kind of see the chair I'm in is lower and broader. It has very wide arms. It's very comfortable. You can shift and rotate. So if you're talking to people around a larger table, or you need to turn to speak to somebody behind you, there's a real sense of comfort and almost ergonomics. In the earlier Ingalls chair is a little bit more upright. Its stance is higher. The seating area is a little bit narrower. And so it was fun for us to compare and contrast the physicality, the different physicalities of the two chairs. So then exhibit design, we worked both in hand drawings and in the computer. And this was essential because working in 3D in the computer really helped us feel the exhibition in the same way that we felt the chairs. And so you can see we used a different geometric strategy in the floor plan of the triangulated period, the folded plane, the late 30s Fellowship and Taliesin West chairs, which are all about angle and triangulation, versus the frame and plane, earlier pieces at Taliesin 1, 2, and 3, which are much more orthogonal rectilinear. And we worked with Brent Budsberg. He built the early plywood furniture for us. We had 3 makers, Lloyd Nadoff, who's the great-grandson of Frank Lloyd Wright, building furniture for us in Oak Park. You imagine a relative, the great-grandson of Frank Lloyd Wright, is still building and working in Oak Park, Illinois. And Brent Budsberg, who's in Milwaukee, and Stafford, who's in Minnesota. And so we tried to work back and forth between hand drawings to try to get to specific points of detail about the arrangements of things in the exhibit, and then how those would have looked in 3D with color, and how as we added things to the walls, it would complement. We wanted to leave enough volume and have the pace and the space of the exhibit comfortable. And I think it worked out. You can see this is the exact same space. This is the entry, the first room of the exhibit. And so going back and forth between computer and hand drawing worked really well. We felt as though we'd really accomplished something with this narrative. Thomas and I were really happy. And Laurie said, Eric, this can't just be an academic exercise. This has to bring people, we have to have a showstopper. We have to have something really exciting. I mean, I appreciate all of the fabrication. I appreciate all these early works, but we need something to draw people in. So I chuckled and I thought, well, it would have been nice to tell me that maybe 6 months ago. So here is Leslie Suchia. This is the library where I spent tons of time. But she said, right at the entry, we need something that's going to stand out. So I said, well, I did find a chair for the Guggenheim Cafe that I don't think anybody's ever seen. And I know they haven't fabricated it because it's in spun aluminum, a material Wright never used before and never used after. And by the way, he made this drawing. This is fascinating. So this is a shop drawing. This is a fully dimensioned, ready-to-build drawing for the cafe chair, which Wright gets from his staff. He's going to initial the red square. He initials and dates the red square, which is black in this photograph, with his approval. Notice there's no approval. He nixes the chair. He says, we're not doing this. He says, we need to do something simpler. 4 years before, in the Natural House, 1954, he was complaining about the cobweb of metal legs in modern furniture. Who knows, maybe referring to the Eames, maybe referring to others. But he didn't like it. It was too messy. He wanted something much simpler, more refined, more organic. And of course, we know that Saarinen is working on the tulip chair at exactly the same time, actually earlier. So Saarinen starts working on the tulip chair in 1956, but they want to patent it. No one wants to patent the chair, so they keep everything hush-hush. And they don't patent it and make a press release until the spring of 58. This is the fall of 57. And so Wright, maybe it's simultaneous evolution. Maybe Wright gets wind that Saarinen is doing a pedestal chair. Whatever the fact may be, here is Wright's version, and he wants to get to it first. And the amazing thing is you see the call out for this spun aluminum shell and aluminum tubing to the point where all of the striations that come from spun aluminum are already in the drawing. He knows exactly why he's chosen this industrial finish. So we went to Butler Metal Spinning, 20 minutes from the museum, and talked to Charles and Chuck Dickinson, father and son, there at the right. Now, metal spinning is a little bit like using a lathe. You just take a big cylinder of aluminum, and first of all, you put a die onto a rod. That rod spins at high speed. Then you put an aluminum cylinder, and then someone with a long stick pushes a wheel into the form, into the aluminum, and pushes it until it hits the die. And so that wheel prevents too much friction from it getting too hot, but it leaves a mark. It leaves a striation. So we got an estimate, and I was sure. Thin spun aluminum with a cast metal base for ballast, never been built before by guys that typically do HVAC equipment. But it was the lowest bid that we got. And so Laurie said, let's build it. So we went back to Chuck and Chuck, and we started to do design development drawings, and we started to make small cardboard prototypes. We asked them, are you going to use a CNC machine, or do you use a 3D printer? What kind of a prototype do you make? Is there a 3D model? They said, we do it old school. No computers. We'll make a profile. Come to the factory. We'll do it together. And so we did. And they used corrugated cardboard, and we made a mock-up with them. And there's the mock-up in their factory. That's the seat and the stem. Here's the back. and we worked through it by hand, all of the details of the neck of the chair. You can see, screw types for the flanges and, roller marks, please. So we're looking at all of the smallest details with people that typically make covers for, large HVAC equipment or, in basically simple industrial uses. But every day we went to the factory, we passed this poster and we thought, these are our people. And they delivered 110%. These chairs and table are the showstopper, the show starter, the show stopper, the show ender. They're remarkable pieces. And people look at the detail with care. They end of the exhibit and they are the back cover of the catalog. So please come and see the remarkable work of these craftsmen. We have 40 original objects, 12 reproductions that tell a story that's never been told about Frank Lloyd Wright's furniture. We have 2 more curator tours, one tomorrow at 1 p.m. and one on the 26th at 1 p.m. Come and share in the new perspective on Wright as a furniture designer. Thank you. Yeah, yeah. Sure. So he just asked if I could go back to Filippo Allison's Frank Lloyd Wright as furniture designer. Yeah, it's tough. It's really tough. There are very few in print. So Filippo Allison, many of you may know that Casina reproduced Frank Lloyd Wright furniture for many years. So Filippo Allison was the leader of that effort. And so he did all of these beautiful drawings to try to update the scale. Sometimes it was the angle of the seat. He did full analysis of Wright's work for Casina so they could make the reproductions. And then when he retired, he went through this effort to try to document and inventory all of his works. And it is really a remarkable achievement. Even if it doesn't, everybody misses something, but the drawings are incredible. They're so detailed. There is one at, I think it's Northwestern Library or Loyola Library in Chicago, but there are none in Wisconsin, and they're extremely difficult to find.
Does anybody else have any questions tonight? We have a microphone here, so we can pass it out so everybody can hear you. You have one down here? Hold on one second.
I've been working with Mike Ledlick to build the furniture for the Burnham
great.
block.
Yeah.
And wondering if you've discovered some things that, with your research that I might not know about yet.
We should talk about that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's the American system-built homes are a remarkable achievement. Please, if you haven't been to see the Model B1, I mean, I would like to write a book either with Mike or as part of a group. I think it's the first modern house in America. They claim that for the King's Road House by Schindler in LA. That's the Mack Foundation that's their byline is Schindler's King's Road House, the first modern house in America. It's 7 years after the Model B1 is designed. I think there's no question that Schindler, if he didn't work on the American system-built homes specifically, he certainly worked on the monolith homes and other prefabricated homes. Wright was a huge influence on his career. Even if they had a falling out, they were close for many years. What's fascinating is that the Model B1 does have furniture today. I think it's very well suited. I don't know if you made that specific furniture. Very well done. I think it's very well suited to the house, but there's a little bit of guesswork involved because unfortunately Wright chose a developer partner, Arthur Richards, who was not, he didn't have the deep pockets of a Montgomery Ward or Marshall Field or the other department store magnates who were basically doing ready cut houses like the American system built as loss leaders they would make no money on the houses, but then they would sell everything inside the house. They would sell all of the stoves and all the appliances and all the furniture, and that's how they made their money. So, Arthur Richards, I don't think, had a vision, and he didn't have deep enough pockets to fully systematize the interiors. So it's a little bit of a question mark. You have lots of drawings with a lot of furniture, but it seems, I wonder whether that was truly Wright's intention or whether those were sales pieces. What's your thought?
So, but I think, when the detailed drawings that he did, I was able to scale things and.
So are you going to make some furniture for the C3 that's being renovated now? Okay, we'll have you up here at the lectern next time. Okay. That's great. I'm so glad you brought that up, because at the end of the exhibit, we have, thanks to Anna Andreevsky, a good friend and colleague of mine at UW-Madison, whose work you might know on Marshall Erdman and his prefabricated houses. She's done a lot of research, wrote several articles, and brought to our attention that the Wyoming Valley chairs, which you may know, they're very Calder-like. They're very playful pieces of furniture. Based on circular themes. So they're at the very end of the exhibit. But she found an article from a local newspaper and that attributes that furniture for the Wyoming Valley School to Herb Fritz and Marshall Erdman. And to my knowledge, it's the first flat pack system of furniture. It was basically a series of parts that you would punch out of a sheet and assemble. It didn't require glue or nails. It was just held together with slots and gravity. And I don't know whether that was ever went into production, but I think that's a great next exhibit, flat pack furniture.
Anybody else have a question?
I do have one from a Zoom audience member, Eric, who's asking about the scale that you used when you made the chairs.
So all of the models are at 1 inch, if I remember correctly. Let's see, they're 6 inches in height. I was going to say quarter scale, but they're not that big. So the models themselves are roughly 6 inches. The backs are 30 inches, so she can do the math on that. Any other questions?
Any other questions, Heather, from the online participants?
I do. I have an audience member question that I was thinking myself, which is what happens to those Guggenheim chairs after the exhibition?
There's a funny story about that, which I'll tell anyone who's interested after the lecture. So we'd love those to be design development prototypes that, so first of all, they're owned by the Museum of Wisconsin Art. So they'll stay as part of their collection for didactic use. We'd love to create a living exhibit at the Guggenheim. So this is one of the ideas that I'm hoping to talk to the foundation about. So the furniture needs to go through design development. If you saw, we can go back to. The chairs are an interesting combination of an extremely lightweight material. So the spun aluminum itself is just a 1/16 of an inch thick. It's a very thin material, and so it's very light. And the ballast is at the base of the pedestal. So there's actually a cast metal piece that is, the aluminum runs up underneath and carries this ballast on the inside. It could be concrete. It was called out as cast metal, but Wright drew 4 inches of cast metal that was 3 inches high. And when we went to the fabricators, they said, well, wow, that's heavy. That's going to weigh 80 to 100 pounds. We said, wow, no, we don't need it to be that heavy. So are you sure that it would weigh that? and he handed me a ring that was about 1.5 inches wide by 1/2 inch thick, and that was 15 pounds. So I think that they had done their research on the spun aluminum, but you learn things in the fabricating process. So there's too much weight right now as designed at the base of the chair. And how's someone who cleans the cafeteria and moves the chair, how are they going to move the chair? They're going to grab the backrest and yank it, right? To carry the seat and the pedestal. And what's connecting the backrest to the seat and the pedestal? 2 thin little 1/2 inch aluminum tubes, and those will certainly bend over time. So there's a different connection that needs to happen, possibly a plate and a welded connection between the backrest and the seat that needs to be developed. I think it could be done really sympathetically, maybe just a sheet that's between the two pieces of tube aluminum that has a different connection, so that there maybe even might need to be an internal framework in the seat so that the framework carries the torque that's going to happen when they try to move the chair from the back. But you can see how beautiful they are. Everyone wants to sit in them. So to have these in the cafeteria in a historic installation that people can read about the chair and see original renderings, learn about it as they sit in it and eat would be fantastic. So if anyone from the Guggenheim is listening out there, please, let's do it.
We'll make it happen. Anybody else with any questions?
I have one more.
One more.
This person asks, why start your study and exhibit after the Oak Park years?
Well, how many people have seen a piece of furniture from the Prairie period in the audience? I would say 2/3 of the people are raising their hand. So it's a known entity. You know, what's so interesting, I don't understand why we don't refer to Wright's furniture. There are only 2 comprehensive books, one by David Hanks from the late 70s and one by Tom Hines from the early 90s. 2 comprehensive books on his furniture. I mean, he has over 800 pieces of freestanding furniture. That does not include all of the built-ins, all of the rugs, all of the flatware, all the graphics. He was a prolific designer. You know, it might be heresy to say, was Wright more of an architect or more of a designer? It's sort of a false, dilemma. He's both all of the time, whenever he could be. And so we wanted to focus attention on post-Prairie because the Wasmuth portfolio is so well known, and because most of the auction sales and the houses that we can go and visit that have original furniture, the 2 great houses. If you haven't been to the Dana Thomas house in Springfield and the Darwin Martin house in Buffalo, you have to do it. They are absolutely remarkable, and they're filled with original furniture. So that's a known entity, and we wanted to connect Wright all to furniture all the way through his career. And then this special thing that we discovered was that furniture is not easy for Wright. I don't know if you could see in some of these sketches. He struggles. His pencil is not swift and easy. He's scratching, he's going over. There's a roughness and a kind of, they're not fearless and quick. He used to say of his Zisonian houses that he could just shake them out of his sleeve. That is not true of his furniture. It was hard for him. He used to say, I'm black and blue, from interactions with my early furniture. So it shows, his furniture design shows his humanity. It shows a part of him that maybe he wasn't so good at, really took effort, especially to move beyond something that he had done before. And I like to see that struggle. We wanted to show that in the exhibit. We wanted to show design drawings, concept drawings that showed Wright's hand. So that you don't see in the Prairie period. We think that it's because many of those furniture drawings were lost in the first fire. He didn't have a major vault at Taliesin, and so we think many of those early drawings burned. But it was also true that Wright was working with John Ayres and George Niedecken, and he would work with the same people. And I think he sent shop drawings straight to them, and they didn't send them back. They built the furniture, delivered it to the house. And so we don't have a record. So you see the furniture, You can go to many of the great, the Art Institute, you can go to the Home and Studio. You can see that furniture, but you can't study it in the way you can when you have the drawings. And so we wanted to profile furniture that really displayed his design intent and his design process. And that happens when he moves to Taliesin. And I would say that for the first time, and this is conjecture, but I feel as though he's free of social and moral constraints at Taliesin, and he's experimenting in a way that he had never done previously. And he's taking chances with furniture that he had never done previously. And that gets translated to his clients in work that most people haven't seen. So we really wanted that translation from Taliesin to the client to Public Works to be the focus of the exhibit. But the prairie stuff is great.
So thank you so much, Eric, for this wonderful presentation.
You're
If people
welcome.
haven't gone to see the Museum of Wisconsin Art, the exhibit, it's still open, right? And it's having a special curator talk tomorrow, I think.
It's tomorrow, and then there's one on the 26th of December, and the show closes on January 25th.
Definitely check it out. Before we go, just one more shout out to the Wisconsin Architectural Foundation. The foundation was established in 1953, just 6 years before Wright's passing. And the foundation is set out to encourage and support future architects through educational programs and scholarships. And to date, the foundation has awarded more than $500,000 in scholarships to Wisconsin architectural students and provided grants to educational programs for children and youth. The foundation's mission is made possible by people like you. And if you'd like to learn more about the Wisconsin Architectural Foundation or support its mission, I invite you to visit the website donate-to-waf.org. So thanks again, Eric Vogel, and
you.
for everybody coming out tonight.